I used to think the city's noise would become a second skin, that maybe I'd grow calluses thick enough to block out the sirens, the yelling neighbors, the never-ending hum of somebody else's struggle spilling through thin walls. But 35 years in, 2 jobs and 1 divorce later, all it gave me was migraines and a constant knot riding between my shoulders. Rent was 3 months behind, my credit cards maxed, and I stopped answering calls with unknown flashing. When you've been bruised that many times, survival feels less like living and more like clinging to the last rung on a rusted ladder. That's why the ads stopped me. House for sale, $500, as is. I laughed at first, sitting in the break room with my stale vending machine chips scrolling on my cracked phone screen. The numbers couldn't be real. $500 was half a paycheck for me, gone in an instant. Houses in the city didn't even dip below $50,000, not even the ones with plywood windows and crime scene tape still stapled to the fence. But something about that posting, it stuck. I spent 2 nights turning it over in my mind, lying awake while sirens painted my walls in red and blue. The ache in me wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. Like the city had pressed its weight on my chest so long I forgot how to breathe deep. $500 wasn't just cheap, it was an exit, even if it turned out to be nothing more than a scam. My best friend Rochelle said, "Girl, don't you dare. That's how folks end up on Dateline." She meant it too. Her voice carried that mix of worry and judgment only someone who's seen you through both heartbreak and eviction notices can. But Rochelle didn't riv in my skin. She didn't carry my kind of tired. So the following Saturday, I slid 2 20s and 10 crumple 5s into my wallet, tucked the listing into my purse, and boarded a bus heading out past the city limits. The ride felt endless, the buildings shrinking, the fields stretching wider, the air loosening its grip. I pressed my forehead to the glass, watching graffiti fade into silos and pine trees. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something lighter than survival. By the time the bus pulled into that little town, my stomach was twisted up, not just from the long ride and the fried chicken biscuit I grabbed at the transfer station, but from the way people stared at me when I stepped off. Their eyes followed me, curious and sharp, like I walked into a church late wearing the wrong dress. When I asked the shop clerk for directions to the address, her lips tightened. She pointed, then turned away without another word. The town wasn't loud like the city. It was quiet in a way that pressed against your eardrums, the kind of silence that made you feel exposed. My suitcase wheels scraped the cracked sidewalk, echoing louder than they should have. And with every stare, every whisper I caught from the corner of my ear, I started to wonder if the risk I'd taken wasn't just financial. Because the way folks looked at me, it wasn't just city stranger they saw. It was as if that house I came for carried a story they all memorized, and I'd stepped straight into the wrong chapter. The walk from the bus stop to the edge of town was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a parade I never signed up for. Folks didn't bother to hide their stares. A man leaning against his truck paused mid-sip, cup frozen halfway to his lips. 2 women outside a laundromat lowered their voices, but never took their eyes off me. I kept my chin high, suitcase bumping against the sidewalk, though inside my chest was knocking like it wanted to break free. By the time I turned down the narrow road the clerk had pointed toward, the air shifted, the shops thinned out, houses sagged under peeling paint, yards carried more weeds than grass. At the very end of that road, half hidden by a leaning oak tree, was the house from the listing. I stopped dead in front of it. It wasn't much. 2 windows blind with grime, a porch slanted just enough to make you nervous, shutters dangling like loose teeth. But something in me softened. The city had never given me quiet. This house, broken as it was, looked like it might. When I knocked on the door of the office listed in the ad, the woman inside slid a stack of papers toward me, like she couldn't wait to be rid of them. Her nails tapped against the desk, her eyes refusing to meet mine. The words, "as is," echoed between us louder than the squeak of the ceiling fan overhead. No inspection, no fuss,
Just my $500 and a shaky signature. "Don't nobody stay there long," she said finally, her voice low. "But if you want it, it's yours." I should have asked questions. I should have wondered why the price was so low, why her tone carried something heavier than disinterest. But the truth was, I needed this to be real more than I needed answers. My pen pressed down harder than I expected, scrawling my name across the lines. That night, I dragged my suitcase up onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight, and the key scraped stubbornly before the lock gave in. Inside smelled of dust and old pine, the kind of scent that clings to your skin. I ran my hand along the wall, grit catching under my fingertips. The silence inside the house wasn't peaceful. It was thick, as if it had been waiting. Still, I set down my bag in the front room and lowered myself to the floor, cross-legged, staring at the bare walls. For the first time in years, I was sitting in something I could call mine. No landlord, no lease renewal, no city noise pressing through thin walls. Just me and this tired little house. But as the evening dragged into night, the quiet sharpened. Outside, crickets chirped, their rhythm steady. Inside, nothing moved, not even the boards settling like houses usually do. It was too still, too watchful. I lay on the floor with my jacket for a pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling, telling myself peace just takes getting used to. But deep in my chest, that same knot twisted again, whispering that maybe the townsfolk's stares hadn't been about me at all. Maybe it was the house they feared. I woke before dawn to a sound I couldn't place. Not loud, not sharp, just wrong. Like someone had drawn a breath too close to my ear, though the room was empty. The air smelled heavier than the night before, damp, as if rain had crept inside even though the windows were shut tight. I shook it off and threw myself into cleaning. House like this, you either reclaim it or let it swallow you. So I scrubbed the kitchen until my knuckles reddened, dragged trash bags across the porch, beat dust from the curtains until gray clouds rose around me. Work was familiar, safe, the kind of tired that gave me back a little pride. By the third day, the rooms began to show their bones. Yellowing wallpaper, warped floorboards, a sink that still rattled with life when I turned the handle. I told myself the creaks I heard at night were just wood loosening after years of neglect. But then came the taps. Soft, deliberate, not in the pipes, not from the walls, under my feet. At first, it was just a few beats, faint enough I thought I had imagined them. But one evening, as the sun dipped and the crickets started their chorus, I sat on the couch with a bowl of instant noodles, and the floor beneath me gave a pulse. Not a creak, not a shift, a thud. Quick, then gone, like a heartbeat too large for this house to contain. My spoon clattered against the bowl. I pressed both hands flat to the wood, heat rising through my palms. The vibration rolled beneath me, steady, certain. And then, as if aware of my listening, it stopped. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, I'd hear faint footsteps cross the hall when I knew no one was there. Drafts snaked through the rooms, though the windows were locked tight. I sat up right until dawn, knees drawn to my chest, telling myself out loud, "It's just an old house, just settling." But my voice didn't carry far. It dropped into the silence and disappeared. By the end of the week, exhaustion lost to stubbornness. I wasn't about to pack up and crawl back to the city just because some old wood groaned. I'd fought off worse. Bill collectors, cheating exes, nights when my stomach growled louder than the heater. This house was mine now. Whatever it held, I wasn't giving it back. Still, the next evening, as I dragged the cabinet away from the kitchen wall to scrub behind it, I froze. There, in the plaster, was an outline.
thin lines etched where wallpaper had peeled away, framing a narrow rectangle just big enough for a door. And when I pressed my ear to the wall, I swear I heard something breathing.
I couldn't stop staring at that outline. A rectangle where no door should be, hidden under peeling wallpaper, like the house was keeping secrets on purpose. My pulse thudded in my ears as I scraped back more paper with trembling nails. The plaster flaked away until a rusted handle appeared, almost laughing at me for not noticing sooner. The air shifted, cooler, as if the wall had been holding its breath and now exhaled straight across my skin. I should have stopped right then, patched it over, pretended none of it existed, but something deeper than fear stirred in me, something like hunger. I wrapped my hand around the handle. It resisted, stiff with years of silence, until finally the latch gave with a groan that shivered through the room. Cold air spilled out, damp and metallic, cutting through the summer heat. Behind the door, a staircase led down into shadow. Stone steps, narrow and uneven, descending into a darkness so thick it seemed to drink the light from the kitchen bulb above. I stood at the threshold, my breath loud against the hush. Every lesson I'd been taught said to turn away. Black women don't go chasing after strange noises, don't step into basements the world tried to bury. But I was so tired of running, from debt, from heartbreak, from everything that had chewed me down to bone. If the house wanted to spit me back out, it would have to do more than whisper from the floorboards. I grabbed a flashlight from my suitcase, thumb trembling on the switch. The beam cut only a few feet ahead, painting damp stone and a railing splintered with age. My legs shook as I took the first step. Each creak echoed too loud, bouncing back at me like footsteps answering my own. Halfway down, I paused. The silence wasn't empty. It pressed in, layered, like voices stacked on top of each other, but just out of reach. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice cracked, swallowed whole by the dark. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber wider than I expected, the air dense with the smell of earth and rust. My light swept across walls lined with shelves, shadows stretching long. I caught a glint, metal, small and curved, before the weight of the place hit me all at once. This wasn't a basement. This was something else, something built to be hidden. My knees buckled, the beam trembling as my breath came shallow. Because whatever waited here wasn't just old wood and dust. It was history, heavy and breathing, waiting for someone stubborn or desperate enough to open the door.
The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I swept it across the chamber. Stone walls stretched farther than the house should have allowed, lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of objects too deliberate to be called junk. The air was thick, earth, dust, something metallic that stung the back of my throat. My breath echoed, too loud, bouncing off walls that felt like they'd been listening for centuries. The first thing I touched was a book, its leather cover cracked, corners chewed by time. I flipped it open and nearly dropped it. Names written in a hand that shook but never wavered. Dozens of them marching down the page. None I recognized, yet all carrying a weight that pressed against my chest. Beside each name was a note. Sold. Ran. Lost. My flashlight caught on something hanging from a nail, iron, black with rust. I lifted it carefully and my stomach clenched. Shackles. Small. Too small. I let them fall back against the wall, the clank echoing like a cry. My knees gave, and I sat hard on the cold stone floor, tears blurring the beam of light. This wasn't treasure, this was testimony. Every shelf told a story, yellowed maps with paths drawn faint across rivers, ledgers where numbers replaced lives, tools bent from use but still whispering survival. I moved slowly, touching each relic like it might break beneath my fingers. My body shook, not from fear anymore, but reverence. I felt eyes on me, not hostile, not warning, just watching, waiting. I whispered, "I see you." My voice cracked, but the chamber seemed to hold it, cradle it. All my life I'd carried a sense of being unmoored, drifting from one disaster to the next. Divorce, debt, the city chewing me up. But here, in the silence below my own house, I felt tethered, like these stories had been waiting for someone who wouldn't look away, someone who understood what it meant to be erased and still stand. Hours must have passed, but I didn't notice until my flashlight dimmed. Panic pricked me. Leaving felt like betrayal, like abandoning them back to the dark. But I promised out loud, "I'll be back. I won't leave this alone." My voice echoed softer this time, steadier. When I climbed the stairs and shut the narrow door, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full of voices, of memory, of history pressed into the bones of this place. I leaned my forehead against the wall and breathed, because deep down I knew this wasn't mine to keep quiet. Not forever.
I tried to keep the cellar to myself at first. Days spent upstairs cleaning, patching the roof, scrubbing floors until the wood showed its grain again. Nights spent below, tracing the spines of books, whispering the names written in fragile ink. The house had become more than shelter. It was a heartbeat beneath my feet. But a secret that big doesn't sit quiet forever. I reached out to a historian I found through a small college website, a man who'd written about escape routes in the South. I told myself I only wanted guidance, someone to help me understand what I'd found. When he arrived, his awe was instant. He moved through the cellar like a child in a cathedral, fingertips grazing chains, maps, ledgers. This could change everything," he whispered, his eyes wide. But his voice carried more hunger than reverence. He took photos even after I asked him not to, scribbled notes faster than I could follow. By the time he left, my stomach was twisted tight. Within a week, strangers showed up at my gate, some polite, some pushy, all with offers. "We'll buy it outright. Think of what this could mean for your future. Artifacts belong in proper hands." Their words sounded smooth, but their eyes gave them away. Vultures circling. The first rock came through my window on a Thursday night, glass spraying across the living room. The second followed 2 nights later, wrapped in a note, "You can't keep this for yourself." I whipped the shards into a pan, hand shaking, anger rising hotter than fear. Sleep left me. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside had me gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I stopped answering knocks at the door. Rochelle called, voice trembling through the phone. "Lauren, you need to leave that place." But leaving felt impossible. The cellar had chosen me. One night I sat at the kitchen table, head in my hands, listening to the crickets outside. My reflection in the dark window looked older than I remembered, lines etched deeper. Yet beneath the exhaustion was something steadier. I wasn't just a woman trying to survive anymore. I was a woman holding a history people had tried to erase. And the more they pushed,
the more I knew I couldn't hand it over. Not to them, not for money, not for peace.
Sleep-deprived nights blurred into one another. I paced grooves into the floor, a notebook always at my side, scribbling pros and cons like the answer might reveal itself if I just kept writing. Every offer, every threat, every whispered name from that cellar weighed on me. Some nights I heard my grandmother's voice, clear as day. She used to tell stories when I was a child, quiet ones, told after the lights were out. About cousins who'd just disappeared into the night. About roads people whispered you shouldn't take because they led somewhere safer than chains. Back then, I thought she was just spinning tales. Now I knew she was handing me the fragments of something bigger, pieces I wasn't ready to fit together until this house pressed them in my hands. Money would have solved a lot. Lord knows I needed it. Debt collectors still called, and the roof still leaked every time rain pressed heavy against the shingles. Some nights I'd stare at the cracked ceiling and think how easy it would be to sell, to buy peace, to sleep without fear of another rock through the window. But then I'd remember those tiny shackles, called in my palm, the names inked into brittle pages, the feeling of voices crowding the cellar air, and I knew some things aren't meant to be sold. Some things are meant to be guarded, even if it costs you. So I made a choice. I began reaching out quietly, not to buyers, but to black-led museums and community archives, the kind built on stewardship, not profit. I let a few trusted hands carry pieces of the collection, items that could be protected and shared. But I never told them everything, never showed them the whole cellar. The rest I kept, cataloged by my own hand, pages filled with careful notes and sketches, locked away behind the rusted handle that only I now touched. And with each decision, the fear inside me shifted into something else. Resolve. I wasn't just clinging to survival anymore. I was standing guard over a legacy. When the offers stopped coming, replaced by silence, I knew I'd drawn a line no one could cross. But I also knew this work wasn't temporary. I had chosen a life. And I couldn't help but wonder, when the world finally quieted down, would the weight I carried ease, or was this burden meant to stay pressed against me forever?
Seasons passed, and the house began to wear me differently. The broken porch I once tiptoed across now stood sturdy under my weight. The roof still groaned when the wind pressed against it, but the leaks were patched, the rooms warm, and the silence no longer felt empty. It felt layered, alive. The neighbors had stopped staring, or maybe they just grew used to me. The rocks through the window, the whispered threats, all of it faded with time. The vultures moved on to shinier prey. What remained was me and this house, stitched together by the stories buried in its bones. Some evenings I carried a candle into the cellar, lowering myself onto the cool stone floor. I'd light the flame, set it between relics, and whisper the names written in those fragile ledgers. My voice steady now, no longer afraid to hear it echo. Gratitude poured out of me in those moments, not for the struggle that had forced me here, but for the strange grace of being chosen to hold what others had tried to bury. People still asked, sometimes, old acquaintances, curious visitors, the occasional historian sniffing around. I kept my answers short. "It's just an old house," I'd say with a shrug. They never pressed, and I never invited them in. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the hands that left those ledgers, the feet that traced maps across rivers,
The children whose names never made it into textbooks but still deserved to be spoken. My job was to make sure they weren't erased again. One night, I sat there with the candle flickering, listening to the crickets outside mixing with the steady hum of summer. My fingers rested on the pages of my notebook, filled now with sketches and names, stories I was piecing together bit by bit. The cellar air wrapped around me, cool but steady, like an embrace. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of purpose. I wasn't just a divorced, broke woman trying to outrun the city anymore. I was a keeper, a custodian, a bridge between silence and memory. Some legacies choose you. Some burdens become blessings when you're strong enough to carry them. And as long as this house stood, I'd be here, listening, guarding, whispering thanks to the ancestors whose voices still stir beneath my feet.